this is just an amazing topic to talk about today, mental health and creativity. And want to make sure that we have an opportunity for each of our panelists to introduce themselves. And I'll start according to who I'm seeing on my screen. So Clark, if you would like to introduce yourself, tell us what you write or what you create, and then why you're here today.
Absolutely. So I'm C.R. Rowenson, but when you're talking to me, I prefer you just call me Clark. I actually write nonfiction focused entirely on building, designing, and repairing magic systems for fiction stories. I'm a freelance developmental editor and writing coach, especially on those topics. And I will definitely provide link to my blog and my workbook that I have. I have a workbook specifically on building limitations for magic systems. And I'm here because I have general anxiety disorder and major depressive disorder, and mental health is just a really important thing to me, and I really think we need to change how we manage it in society.
Thank you. All right, Lani?
Hi, I'm Lani Forbes. I'm a young adult fantasy author, and my trilogy, The Age of the Seventh Sun series, is the first two books. Well, the first book is out now from Blackstone Publishing. Book 2 actually releases on Tuesday of this coming week. And then book 3 will be coming out next year. And I was a teacher for 10 years teaching math and science. And I recently went back to school to finish a master's in clinical psychology with an emphasis in trauma specifically. And like Clark, I also have had my struggles with mental health. I suffered from complex PTSD as well as severe postpartum depression, and currently struggling with similar generalized anxiety disorder kind of stuff, but hopefully managing it well. So
thank you so much. And Robison?
Yeah, my name is Rob Wells, and I have written 15 novels. I am a New York Times bestselling author. My most recent book was called The Warning. It was co-written with James Patterson, and that's the one that hit the New York Times bestseller list. I write primarily young adult science fiction. And the reason that I'm on this panel is that for the past 12 years, I have had every mental illness diagnosed at some point, but about 4 years ago, it was determined that I have OCD and schizophrenia. And so that is what I struggle with every day. I'm fortunately on really good medicine, but that is who I am and how I write.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing what you write and why you're here. And hopefully, as you can see, there's a variety of experience where our panelists are coming from. And my name is Robin Glassey, and I also have a variety of experience myself. I have seasonal affective disorder. I've also been diagnosed with ADHD. There's a few other things I'm not going to share. Maybe I will. I don't know. We'll see if they come up. I am also an adoptive mom. 3 of my boys are adoptive. 1's biological. And out of my 4 boys, 3 have been diagnosed with ADHD. So if you think about 6 members of our family and 4 of them having ADHD, is quite an interesting, we've had a lot of interesting adventures. So, and then Lani, you might appreciate this, that also out of 4 of my boys, 3 of them have been diagnosed with reactive attachment disorder. And there's also more that goes along with that, and some learning disabilities.
Wow.
So I graduated from BYU with a bachelor's in psychology, and I worked up at LDS Hospital on the adult psychiatric unit. So I come at mental illness from a lot of different angles and have a lot of experience. So we're talking today about we want to have a candid discussion about the struggles that we as creators experience, okay? And how mental health can affect our creative work. So let's first of all talk about, what are these struggles that we experience as creators when it comes to our mental health. Anyone want to step forward?
Sure.
We're being candid, which can be difficult.
Yeah, and I'm just going to put this caveat that goes in front of pretty much everything I say, that in my experience. So anytime I say something here, it's going to be in my experience.
And I think that's really important to say that like I can't speak for everybody who has ADHD. I can't speak for every mom that raising kids with RAD. So it's our own personal experience. Thank you.
Yeah. So in my experience, a lot of the struggles I've had with writing and all of the creative craft hasn't been anything new. All of the fears, all of the imposter syndrome, all of the worry about it getting accepted, all of that is still there. It's all stuff that's always known, but how it manifests and how bad it is and how I have to deal with it has all changed and morphed and been affected by my own struggles and my own issues that I'm working through. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things. That was one of the biggest realizations for me, was recognizing that it's not new, but it's different.
Okay. It changes. It's not always the same.
Yeah.
Okay.
So for me personally, with the general anxiety, that would latch on to some very common stuff we all deal with, like the imposter syndrome being a big one. And maybe this is just me, but while trying to work on stuff, that repeated thought of, I don't know if I can do this.
Mm-hmm.
And the anxiety would just latch onto that and spiral that out of control into full-blown panic attacks, to the point where I'd be doing my morning writing and I'd have breakdowns and I'd be crying, and then I would have to gather myself up together so that I could still do some writing. And that's kind of what I mean is all the different issues that we deal with kind of attack and latch onto these problems in their own way. I don't know. Have you guys experienced something similar?
Yeah. Yes. I'm seeing Lani, her head shaking. Yes, too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I know for me, a lot of my mental health struggles with writing specifically manifest as, like you said, self-doubt is a huge one. You get a lot of kind of intrusive thoughts that come in and kind of get in your head and are really hard to separate and tell them to shut up so I can focus on writing a little bit. So dealing with those struggles inside yourself, those self-doubts inside yourself, but then also sometimes just getting in, for me anyway, I feel like when I'm creative, I have to be in this like creative mindset. And sometimes the depression, or sometimes if I'm triggered by something or I'm dealing with something, it's really hard for me to get into that creative space, that creative mindset. Especially just, I'm a firm believer in the point of stories, especially, is to elicit emotion. And I think as creators, we tend to be very emotional individuals. And I think that kind of probably plays into a little bit of the stereotype of, oh yeah, the art, we're always the tortured artists. But I really think it's just because we tend to be so much deeper in touch with emotion. And especially with something like depression or anxiety, if it's kind of detaching us from our emotions, it's really hard to then channel those emotions into a story. When we're feeling so detached and chaotic inside ourselves, it's hard to then channel emotion into what we're writing.
Well, and I think, something what you said resonated with me is the intrusive thoughts, and it can be maybe too in tune with our thoughts, where that maybe that tortured artist idea comes from, right? Is that sometimes we're too mindful that it's hard to disconnect from those in order to connect with a writing project that we're trying to do. Yeah.
One thing that I found interesting is I think that for people who don't have mental illness, they often look at there being a hierarchy of severity. As in, I only have generalized anxiety disorder, or I only have ADHD, and I don't have anything psychotic or whatever. And speaking as someone who has had like everything, I would take schizophrenia and OCD over depression any day of the week when it comes to writing. Yes, there are the intrusive thoughts that come in and everything, but when I am suffering from depression, which is the most common of all, I mean, maybe anxiety is the most common of all, but when I am suffering from depression, there's nothing that I want to do more than just lay my head down on my desk and not do anything and not attack any problem, be overwhelmed by everything, and just want to avoid, and cry, and so I think when I tell people that, they're like, "Well, isn't that the big scary one?" Well, no. I think any of these can be big and scary, depending on the situation that you're in. Any of them can be debilitating, and I mean a disability. Any of them can be absolutely stalling in your ability to put words on a page and do all of the other things that are associated with writing, from marketing to editing to everything. All of them, there is no hierarchy of what is good and what is bad.
Well, you think about different, because it's asking, what are some of these struggles that we can have and how do they impact us? I also think about how it's not just my own struggles that impact me, right? Because here I am, raising children who also have some struggles. And as a mom, that automatically impacts me, right?
Yeah.
So as we talk about, thoughts and intrusive thoughts, right? They're the things that they are struggling with. And I'm also thinking about and going, okay, how as a mom can I help them, or their behaviors that are a result of their diagnoses are also directly impacting me, also directly impacting the time that I have to write as well. So that may be also something that creators could be struggling with as well. It's not just, I have writing time and now I'm going to sit down to write, and I'm struggling with pulling this together. They may also be caregivers of others who also have mental illness, and that is impacting the ability to create as well.
So I want to circle back to something Rob said, and I'm glad you mentioned this, Rob. It had to deal with that kind of perceived hierarchy of severity, because that's a trap that I know I fell into for a really long time, of just saying, just exactly what you said. I just have anxiety. Mm-hmm. I just have depression. And I've seen that with a lot of people, and my wife, people in my family. It seems to be a very common thing where we marginalize our own struggles. And personally, I use that to beat the crap out of myself mentally, saying, what's your problem? Why can't all you have is a little bit of anxiety? Like, why is this stopping you? Why are you letting this stop you? And I turned that into a failure on myself because I didn't perceive it as severe. And I wanted to bring that up because that's something I've seen a lot, and it's not true.
And the sad thing about that too is when we do that, we then don't think we're worthy of getting help. We don't think we're worthy of, getting the assistance or maybe reaching out for certain resources that we need, because we think, it's not that bad. I don't need to see a counselor. I don't need medication. I don't need any of that. Like, mine's not that bad. But in reality, when we do that, we are denying ourselves from getting the help that we could really benefit from.
Do you think that maybe part of that has to do with this idea? Because we use this word mental illness, and maybe forgetting or not understanding that the brain is part of the body, and a lot of these things actually have like a physiological basis. So do you feel like, because how many times have you heard somebody say, oh, get over it, or this idea of it is something that we can get over, it is something that we can overcome, without that really clear understanding that this is brain based, that there are neurons and neurotransmitters involved. What do you guys think about that?
I think there's definitely a perception among a lot of people, and I think it's going away in recent years, but it still is strong,
Mhm.
that mental illness is a character flaw.
Mhm.
That it is that it is something that you can overcome through willpower,
Right.
and that that I am sad, and so I will think happy thoughts. I will say my daily affirmations, and I will no longer be sad. And they don't view it as this is a medical condition where there are chemicals that are causing the depression, there are chemicals that are causing the anxiety, that need to be treated by a physician, or a medical professional or a therapist, and by viewing them as a just a flaw that is to be overcome. And I think that it's perpetuated by the media, really, because there are so many shows, there's so many books where I was able to fight my way through this, and so can you.
Mhm.
I think that it's really detrimental to the way that other people perceive you and then expect you to perform.
So like this idea of a superpower, right? And these, and don't get me wrong, we love to have inspirational stories. Inspirational stories, they inspire us, right? But if an inspirational story then gives the public this idea that every person that has a disability should have that capability,
Yeah.
what happens?
Well, and that's why I wanted to lead off with the whole in my experience,
Okay, right.
because I have found ways to manage and work with my own struggles and my own disorders. But I can't assume that that's just some superpower about me and that it's going to be the same solution for everybody else.
Right.
Because that's the problem I have with a lot of those stories, is there are people who either have a temporary situation, like a temporary bout of depression, which is very real and very serious.
Mm-hmm.
But they were able to get over that through either time or a variety of exercises or temporary medication, and then assuming that that is how it works for everybody who has depression,
Right.
is dangerous, really.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
especially because
So,
go ahead.
no, go ahead. Absolutely. Thank you, Lani.
Yeah, I was just going to say, especially something like with depression, it can have so many different causes. Like you can have depression that maybe is situationally based. You can have depression that is because of a chemical imbalance in the brain. You can have depression, like I said, that I struggled with severe postpartum depression, which was a result of hormones and stuff post-pregnancy. And so I think to assume that when someone says like, yeah, I have depression, we just assume we know what that means, and that, we want to fit them into a box and prescribe the same thing for everybody. And that's, like you said, it's totally not accurate, because everybody has each person's going to have their own unique experiences. They're going to have their own unique brain chemistry, their own unique personalities, the way that they respond to things differently. And so, yeah, expecting that, well, this worked for me, so this should work for everybody, and it's not accurate when it comes to mental health.
Right.
Well, and I also think there's a linguistic problem with
Absolutely.
both the terms depression and anxiety, where everybody can be depressed at some point, and everybody can feel anxiety at some point. If you're public speaking, you will feel anxiety. If you are doing, if someone close to you has died, you will feel depressed. There are so many people who they say, well, I have experienced anxiety when I had to give a talk in front of my workplace. And I was able to get through it through this technique and this technique and this technique. Whereas they are neglecting the fact that what they are referring to is a emotion and not an illness. And I think that is a linguistic problem associated. So that's why I think there are some people who say, well, I have clinical depression or I have major depressive disorder, to differentiate themselves from people who are just depressed because something sad happened.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's a really good point.
And there are, like, Clark was saying that there are still those circumstances where somebody's experiencing depression, situational, which is very real. It's no less real, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in no way do I want to minimize that, right? Because it's still that person's experience. And with anxiety, to what you're saying, Rob, I remember this one time, I wish I had the definition with me, but I remember looking up the definition, and it said something in it about that it had to do with being afraid of things that were, I don't want to use the word unrealistic, but sort of along the lines of that it wouldn't really happen, or if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, no, that's not what I'm experiencing.
Right.
The anxiety that I'm experiencing is based on very real situations in the past. And that I'm afraid that those are going to happen again. So, yeah. So, you think about that. Think about if you've really experienced something in the past and you're afraid that it's going to happen again, and you don't know when it's going to happen again.
Yeah.
You think about living with children with trauma, and they have certain behaviors that go with that.
Yeah.
And that makes me anxious. It's not me going, oh, that's not really going to happen. It's like, oh, yeah, it is. And when?
That's really interesting, because for me, with my experience with anxiety, the best description I've ever had was somebody said it's like if you're playing Skyrim and the boss music comes on and there's nothing around you. It's just you and the boss music is playing, and it just keeps playing. So it's just this base level anxiety. What you're talking about seems to connect or can easily flow into something that Lani, you had been mentioning, like some of the trauma and how that can generate some of that.
Yeah. So it's based on
what's interesting too. Yeah, and that's exactly what I wanted to talk about too, is sometimes we view the mind and the body as such separate things, when in reality our experiences, and it's interesting, is so much of the current research that we're seeing on neuroplasticity and how the brain develops is the experiences that we have actually affect the way that our brains develop and the way that our brains make connections to things. And so, like, yeah, I've heard anxiety described as like the boss music. For me, I always describe it as like a fire alarm. It's like my body senses that there's smoke, And so, but it can't tell the difference between, oh, somebody left a candle on and, oh, the house is burning down. So my body has been trained, my brain has been trained, my body has been trained through past experiences to react when it smells smoke as, oh my gosh, the house is burning down. But, having to then learn strategies and techniques and tools to be able to teach myself how to distinguish between house burning down and someone left the candle on. But it's so important to understand how the experiences that we have in our lives actually physiologically affect the way that our brains grow and change and develop. And our brains are always growing and changing and developing, even into adulthood.
So let's then shift as we kind of introduce this idea of our experiences and how that shapes our brains, and really this is then impacting our creativity, right? Let's talk about then COVID, right? And how can this affect our creativity for in a positive or a negative way?
I'll start. I don't have a book coming out soon, and it is entirely due to COVID. When COVID hit, there were so many tweets and messages on Facebook that said, when the pandemic hit Shakespeare's time, he wrote King Lear. What are you going to do with all of your spare time? I was working on a book. I was 30,000 words into the book. I loved it. It was going really well. I have not touched that book since April. And it has been, I have shifted my creative outlets to other things, but I haven't been able to write because of the fact that, there are some environmental factors to it. There's some work is a little busier because of COVID, but I do not have the mental capacity to handle writing for pleasure that I once did before COVID hit, and I have not experienced COVID. I none of my immediate family members have, although we are under extreme stress because we have a lot of comorbidities. But the whole experience of it has completely derailed my ability to write.
Thank you for sharing that.
And one thing I really want to touch on with COVID too is, I think we've all felt that pressure of like, oh, you've got so much free time now. You must be able to be so creative. And the reality is, I think so many people have been experiencing stress responses since COVID has started, either from the imminent physical threat of the virus itself, of losing jobs, of, all these things that have gone along with the pandemic. But I also think the social isolation is just as much of a survival threat. I love attachment theory. It's my favorite theory of psychology. And I firmly believe that we are social creatures and we are meant to live in connection with other human beings. And our brains literally interpret isolation as a survival threat. And so even if we haven't physically had COVID or, just the fact that we've been so isolated and disconnected from society and from each other, I think it absolutely still sends our bodies into that same kind of stress response of, you're in survival mode, basically. And when we're in survival mode, our brains are not able to always access those higher functioning activities like being creative. And that's okay.
Yeah. One of the
Clark, do you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah. One of the big things that my therapist had to help me remind myself of over and over was just the fact that it's not like you're taking time off of work. We are, by definition, in a global crisis. It's a pandemic. That's what it is. So it's not unreasonable. In fact, it's entirely expected for us to be handling this as though we're dealing with a crisis, because we are.
We all are.
one thing I wanted to mention in terms of handling that is being okay with how that impacts things. That's not a measure of you and your worth. So like, thank you, Rob, for sharing that. That was before COVID hit. On top of my full-time job, I was regularly spending 12 to 20 hours a week writing. And about a month into COVID, I crashed hard and I was getting maybe 2 to 4 hours. And that was just where I had to adjust my new normal. And I've slowly built up over that, but there wasn't anything wrong with me because I had to do that. That's one of my big things about all the mental illness, is just trying to stress that it doesn't mean there's something wrong with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And like Rob, I was so close to finishing one of my projects. It's a tips and tools book for ADHD writers. So close. And I haven't been able to pick that particular book up because of what we've talked about, that higher level processing. And same thing as Rob, I shifted over to other creative acts that were smaller. Because I didn't have extra time. I had even less time. Like, I felt like my house was already on fire. And then COVID hit, and it was like, oh, and now you're locked in your house that's on fire, right?
Yeah.
And you can't come out, right? So
And you can't call anybody to help you.
And nobody's allowed to come over. So
and I think that it's more than just COVID. And I don't want to get into politics at all, but 2020 has been a really bad year for so many things, no matter where you sit. And one of I have schizophrenia and OCD. And with my OCD, one of the things that I do is that I mean, they refer to it now as doom scrolling, but I've been doom scrolling for 20 years. I am obsessed with the news. And one of the first things I do when I get up in the morning, and one of the first things I do when I go to bed at night, is I check the Washington Post and the Johns Hopkins Clinic to see what the COVID deaths are. I check their figures to see what the latest results are. And I check the news to see what new bad thing has happened in the news. Because there have been many bad things that happened in the news. And so it isn't necessarily global pandemic. It is just the onslaught of detrimental mass chaos, that is, whether you've got OCD or not, it interrupts you, it disrupts your thought patterns, and it overwhelms your ability to be productive in the way that you used to be productive.
So what do we do with that then? You know, where this has been an unusual year, right? And even if it wasn't, if you just found that, wow, I'm really struggling with my writing, you know, this, whatever the condition is, I'm really having a hard time. What are some things that, some suggestions that we can give to help with mental health, right? Even just like some little small things that can help with, you know, boosting creativity or boosting overall mental health.
Yeah, I'll jump in right here, just because, unless you want to. Go ahead. I was going to say, for me, it's really helpful for me to understand that, like, our nervous systems kind of have two different states. There's the kind of rest and relax state that we call the parasympathetic nervous system. And then there's the fight, flight, stress response that we call the sympathetic nervous system. And so for me, when I'm in that fight or flight, you know, that state, I can't create, I can't relax. I struggle a lot more. And I have been, because of 2020 and all the chaos, that state has been, unfortunately, more common than my relaxation state. And so the beautiful thing, though, about the human body is that there are so many different ways that we can calm that stress response down. And so for me, I've been working with my therapist a lot on mindfulness techniques and relaxation techniques to literally physically relax my body down so that I can kind of pull out of that stress response. And so some of those things that have been really helpful for me have been just learning specific breathing strategies. I downloaded the Calm app on my phone, and just I could tell if I was getting into that place where I was getting into a panic attack, I could literally open the Calm app on my phone and it would guide me through a breathing exercise that literally calms your nervous system down. So there's so many, I mean, I if I have time, I'll go in and I'll share a list in the comments of just quick little strategies you can do that just kind of help bring your physical nervous system down.
Yeah.
And one of my other favorites is sometimes, like I said, if it's not a physical thing, if it's that mental thing where I'm getting those intrusive thoughts really, really bad, one of the best things to do is to literally distract your brain away from those intrusive thoughts. And you can do that by engaging your senses. So sometimes I have like a little sensory kit where I literally have like something that smells good or something that tastes good or like something I can physically play with, because if my brain is distracted with processing sensory information, it can't always focus on where it's trying to spin out of control.
Yeah.
Or even one of my favorite strategies of all is just, I don't know, it's a weird one, but it's one that I use. I will start trying to name things in alphabetical order. Like I'll start like, okay, name 5 animals in alphabetical order. And I'll just, okay, antelope, barracuda. And for some reason, just that quick little thing pulls my head away from that spiraling thought pattern and pulls it away into something else. And so just learning little techniques and strategies like that have been really helpful for me to kind of stop the stress response so that I can get more into that relaxed state.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really liked you mention that. Two of the ones that I've learned is one is that I stop and I have to look around the room and find one object of every color and just really focus on finding those objects. And sometimes I have to go through the color spectrum multiple times, but just staying focused on that until my brain calms down. I really like that one. And square breathing is another cool one.
I love square breathing.
Yeah, so square breathing, for anybody who doesn't know, you can do any count you want, but for me it's 4. I breathe in for a count of 4, hold for a count of 4, exhale for a count of 4, hold for a count of 4. And that's just, you just go through that as many times as you need, and that gets you really focused on your body, helps break some of those thought cycles. It's really useful. One thing I did want to mention, I know we spent a lot of time talking about how it's not just something you can get over, and it's not 100% like mental perception and that kind of stuff, but having proper framing can make a very big difference. So for me, that really came down to reframing what was important, like what my goal was on a weekly basis. Because before I had a word count and I had a time amount that I wanted to be working on writing every day or throughout the week. And I had to change that to say that's not realistic anymore. My goal now is to do any writing at least every day. Sometimes that was as little as 30 seconds of I opened the Word document and I read a paragraph that I wrote before. And other times I was able to get an hour or 2 in. But I changed my goal to be more realistic from the circumstances.
I like that. Thank you. Rob, did you have anything that you wanted to add? Is there something that works for you as far as you said you had switched to doing other creative things?
Yeah. So there's an artist who I admire named Dana Howell, who is really talented, really good. And she, at the end of the year, she posted the things that had been most useful to her as an artist in the last 2 years, where she had had dove into her art and quit her job and become an artist full time. And she referred to something she called her hobby streak. which is that she would do her art for at least 30 minutes a day, and then the goal was on habits, not on, or the focus was on habits, not on goals. So her point was that she would do 30 minutes of work a day and then post a picture of whatever state it was in, whether it was just a canvas with a few swishes of color on it, or whether it was a finished piece, and she would post it on Instagram with the hashtag hobby streak, and it would get her to focus on something, on accomplishing something.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have started doing that. I just today hit day 28 of doing this.
Nice.
So 4 weeks now, where I do both the hobby streak and I do writing streak, where I will write for half an hour a day, and sometimes I write 300 words, which is the opposite of how I normally write. Normally, I will write books in 3 weeks, and then of course go through a lot of editing. But it is a matter of lowering the expectations that I have on myself, and focusing on accomplishing small habits, the habit of doing something every day, and not worrying about the finished picture, not worrying about, will this be published next year? Will this be published 2 years from now? Fortunately, I have a day job that pays the bills, and so I'm not a full-time writer that is required to churn out words day in and day out. But just by these little steps of me doing my hobby, which is painting, and then doing my writing streak, which is writing, I am able to get stuff done every day and feel like I've accomplished something, and it has helped immensely.
Thank you. And I love that you said, doing these small things. And we'll turn it over to questions in just a minute. I just wanted to stress that, for me, I really hate the term self-care, because I know I need to do it, and yet sometimes I think self-care has to be this big giant thing, like you got to exercise for like 30 minutes or an hour, and a lot of times I just don't have that time. But if you can kind of think of it in like just little small pieces, right? Like, even I have this little stepper out in the other room. If I can just do that for like 5 minutes, right? 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, I'm doing something for my body physically that helps me to feel better. I've already gone out there like twice today in between classes to help me to sit longer. So like, break those things down into just little smaller pieces, like it's been said. Even if I'm just writing a paragraph, right? Then it helps fill you creatively. Yeah. Look for those little things that you can do during the day to help fill you, that will then kind of bring you down from out here in survival mode and start inching you up a little bit higher.
Yeah.
So let's take some questions, and then we'll see where we go.
I do want to add really quick, because I like how Rob brought up how the artist would post it on social media, right? That when she would do these things, she'd post it. And I think accountability can be really helpful. Like I said, I firmly believe we are social creatures. And so for me, if I do set those little tiny goals for myself, sometimes having somebody to do them with even can be so helpful. And so being able to meet someone at a coffee shop to write for 30 minutes even. I think that's the main way. That's the only reason I got a book finished at all during COVID, was because I literally had a friend who got on Skype with me and was like, okay, we are writing from this time to this time. I'm going to sit here and watch you do it. And having her do that for me was so helpful. And I don't know if I would have been able to get a book finished without her support and her help, really.
I want us to answer questions. I did want to add that we talked about little individual things, but all the standard things apply. Exercise, regular sleep, routines, therapy, medication, those are just as important as ever. I just wanted to make sure that we hit that.
Yes.
Okay. What's our first question?
All right, thank you. Tree Hugger asks, if you've already battled depression, how do you steel yourself against the rejection of querying? And I'll kind of add with that, there was another person that asked about that with anxiety as well. So,
Yeah, and that's a good question. And I think one of the ways is to really celebrate that you celebrate your bravery, because the fact of the matter is that you are being brave. I mean, how long does it take you to get that submitted in the first place? Like, what's that process that you have to go through to send it out? So celebrate the fact, first of all, that you finished what you wrote, and celebrate your bravery in sending it out. And maybe think about what are the supports that you're going to have in place. Like, do you need to have a cheering section with you? Because I think about, I think about myself, like I go through those times where I'm like, oh, maybe I need to give this up. And I have to have my cheering section that says, no, keep on going.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I could add right onto that, when I send out stuff, unfortunately, I've got an agent. I've been doing it for 12 years now. So I'm not cold querying, but when I get an editorial letter back, which I know is going to be, editorial letters, they buoy you up, but they also tear you apart. And when I get those letters back, I will not read them for days. And they will sit in my email box, and I will talk to my wife, and I will say, will you read this for me, and will you tell me the good things?
Love that.
And she does, and she tells me the good things, and then I am able to ease myself into it. And so I think having a partner, whether it is a spouse or a friend or a writing group that you can rely on to be that buffer that you need to defend you against bad news, because we're all going to get bad news, and writers have to have thick skins and all that, blah, blah, blah. But if you can have someone who will run interference for you and help take the edge off, I think that helps a lot.
That's true for reviews too.
I mean, it's automatically going to be disappointing. Are you going to be happy that you got bad news?
So
no.
one of the things that I've been doing for a while now is, again, I feel framing is very important. Is for a long time I was very frustrated when people would just use quotes like that was supposed to solve things for me. And then I started rewording the quotes so that they had more impact for me personally, and turned them into mantras that I follow and just repeat to myself. And the one that I use for that kind of stuff is that everything in life is training, and I can't fail training.
Love that.
So if I get this rejection back, that's great, because I'm training, and this just is a little bit more training that got me a little further. I got trained with rejection. I got trained with application. I got trained with handling these emotions. I got trained with confidence in myself. I just got a whole bunch of training for free. And I know that's not going to help everybody, but that helps me a lot.
All right, let's take another question, because I know we're running out of time.
Redwall fan asks, how do you overcome a lack of motivation, interest, creativity, or etc., which is caused by mental illness?
There's, so I'm sighing because I'm thinking back to one of the, it's actually in the ADHD book that I wrote, that there are different ways that you can kind of approach projects. You can approach projects in terms of like your excitement towards it. You can approach projects in terms of fan excitement. You can set up rewards for yourself to finish things. So there are different ways that you can kind of set things up, and even breaking it down into smaller pieces. Sometimes we get overwhelmed and we don't feel motivated because of the size of it.
I utilize I utilize social connection. That is probably like a huge motivator for me. Like I said, I just connecting with other people, finding other people to hold me accountable, to come alongside me, and like I said, sit down with me on a screen and Skype with me. A lot of times that helps with my motivation, because if I set a time for myself to sit down and write, if I'm not feeling motivated, there is nothing that's going to get me to sit down and do it. But if I know I have to meet somebody at a coffee shop, okay, fine, I don't want to flake on them, so I'll show up. And then I'm surprised sometimes at how much I'm actually able to get done. So I tend to rely very heavily on my social support system.
Yeah, but there are different ways, there are different kinds. Some people are motivated by money. There are apps that you can use, like there's even like charity ones, like if you have to donate to a charity you hate, if you don't get things done, like seriously, there's all kinds. Like, I do not want to donate to this charity, and if you don't get it done, then your money goes to them.
If you're fueled by spite, stick.com.
One thing that I have done, and I feel like I'm in a place where I can do it because of the fact that I have reached a lot of goals. I've been with the Big Five. I've hit the New York Times list, whatever. I don't link my self-worth to my writing. And so I haven't published a book in 3 years. And it has been very difficult for me, and it's been a lot because of my mental illness. But I just have the freedom to have other pursuits and that I'm comfortable with, where I say, maybe I'm not going to write a book today, and that's all right with me. And I am happy with myself in who I am, and I have other things that make me me. And it is not writing that defines me.
Thank you. Well, I know we're running out of time, so let me just give the panelists an opportunity to maybe say where they're going to be or where you can be found. Clark, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I posted this in the chat online. You can find me at my website, just crrowenson.com. That's the easiest way to find me. You can email me through there. And yeah, that's the best way to get in touch with me.
Awesome. Lani?
Yeah, same thing. My website's just laniforbes.com. It's one of the benefits of having a weird first name is it's just simple. And I'm also on Instagram at just at Lani Forbes, or you can find me on Facebook, any of those. But yeah, my website has links to all my social media accounts, and then you can message me through my website as well.
Rob?
Also, I have an unusual name, RobisonWells.com. You can find me there. Also, launching off of this topic, I am on a panel tonight, which is about using art to get you through creative blocks. And that is a panel that is at 8 o'clock tonight called Macrame Me to Heaven. So if you want to join that panel, I'm going to be talking all about all of this stuff.
Wonderful. And you can find me at robinglassey.com. So how easy is that for our places? And then you can also find my notebooks. I've got a Anxiety Cat notebook and Nope Cat, as well as some other ones on Amazon. So they're just kind of fun cats that have some things going on, and you can use them as notebooks or whatever. So, all right, thanks everybody for coming, and enjoy LTUE.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Next hour in
you.
this